welcome everyone. Good morning, good evening, good night, or wherever you may be in this world. It's an interesting time, and definitely my first time at NDC, and it's exciting. Uh, it's also a little scary because it's first NDC talk is virtual. I've done a lot of in-person talks, and so this should be an interesting experience. I look forward to doing this. Having said that, welcome to this talk. This talk, we tell you all about feature flags, what they are, what they look like, and use cases. Then we will talk about, I want to touch on the differences between deployment and release. And Greet did that in the previous talk. You did a great job, talking about that and a lot of other topics that I will not be talking in this talk. So there is a little bit of intersection. I feel like my talk is leaning more on the feature flags and some frameworks and other things like that. So we will get into the meat of the talk with discussions on feature flag frameworks and services that enable these frameworks. And then we'll talk about, two or three different types of feature flags, like, what use cases we would use them in. Toggles, you'd have probably heard of A/B testing and Canary releases. So we'll talk about those. And then I will end with some tech. These are basically going to be pros, cons, best practices, and gotchas. And this is mostly from my experience using feature flags. This is a very broad and high-level talk on all these concepts and frameworks because we are covering a broad, we're trying to go across the landscape of feature flags. So hopefully, that's you take away a good understanding of feature flags, and I will leave you with resources to do deep dives. So before I go on, let's talk about just a little brief introduction to me. I recently changed jobs and now work at Microsoft. I am a remote worker, so I'm used to doing presentations on, not in a conference format though. Before that, I was a Microsoft Azure MVP, and I also run the Orlando.NET user group and the Orlando Code Camp. Best way to get in touch with me is either my email or Twitter. I'm very active on Twitter, but not always necessarily tech. I talk about everything under the sun. And with that, we'll jump into feature flags. So what you're seeing on screen is a definition of something called feature toggles, which is also called feature flags. So you have different names for these. This is from the earliest. This is the earliest definition I could find, and this is from Martin Fowler. Most of you probably know Martin Fowler, and he defines it as a powerful technique for allowing teams to modify system behavior without changing codes. And what Geert was talking about in his previous talk is testing in production. So you can do some of those in here using feature flags. So a flag is software. It's something that is one or more bits, and it stores binary values. So it's a Boolean, true or false. In the same context, in software, a feature is a chunk of functionality that delivers some kind of value to the customer. Thus, a feature flag, in the simplest definition of it, is an if statement that surrounds a chunk of functionality in your software. Feature flags, in reality, can be and are more complex than an if statements. But this is a very good way to get started. A feature flag is a way to change your software's functionality without changing or redeploying your code. So that is very important. You don't want to change your code, or you don't want to redeploy it. You simply want to hit a hit a, and everything happen or you turn it off. These are also known as feature toggles, and they go by different names, which we will try to discuss in this talk. It's a set of, this is basically a set of patterns, software patterns, which can help a team to deliver new functionality to users, and it can do that rapidly and safely. So just looking at this screen, this is a simple version of a feature flag. So if you, it has two different parts. The first is a config settings, and this config settings in the app settings.json file, and it has a second part that basically what it's doing is it's reading the config setting. As you can see, it's reading the config settings and then it's using that. So this is, if you take away anything from this talk, this is a feature flag. But most of you have probably used this at some level. So if you look at the anatomy of a feature flag, it's what it is it's basically has a bunch of components. The first one is a toggle point. So the toggle point is the actual point in the code where the check occurs to see if the toggle is flipped on and off, or the feature flag is on or off. In this case, the if statement saying if trial subscription is active for user one, this is a toggle point. Now, your code might have multiple similar toggle points. So keep in mind that this particular type of toggle point can exist in multiple places for each. And then you have a toggle. In this case, the function that actually defines what this code does is a toggle router. So for one router, you may have multiple points. Toggle context. So that starts to become a little tricky. What is a toggle context? The toggle context is the happening behind the scenes that actually the router takes into account while computing whether to toggle on or off. So in this particular case, let's say you want to check if a trial subscription is active. So what you're going to do is you're going to check the account creation date, and you're going to check the number of trial days elapsed or the number of trial days remaining or something like that. So that is the toggle context, and that happens behind the scenes. And finally, previous screen, you saw the app settings.json file with the config. So that is the toggle configuration. So some of the other things that could exist in the toggle configuration are things like, let's say your toggle uses a database. So you could have the database connection string in the toggle configuration. So it's very environment specific, like values. It does not have anything to do with the actual context of the feature flag. So those are the four major points. And most of the feature flags, you come across in this talk, they'll have those at some level. So let's talk about deployments and releases. Now, these are, these terms are, and the reason I'm taking some time to dive into this is because that's what a feature flag does. It separates a deployment from a release. But today, if you go talk to most software teams, and some are more mature than others, but as a consultant, when I go out into the field, I see that teams often have difficulty distinguishing between deployment and release. So they use deployment and release often interchangeably, which leads to a lot of confusion. Now, if you throw in the term ship, this is often used by business-facing entities like, project managers and program managers, and they use the term ship. So this complicates the situation even further. So the ship, if someone is using it, that's a more I guess, business-facing term, but I also want to stress that deployments and releases are different, and each one has a different risk profile. And that's what we're trying to do is we're trying to the goal of this entire talk is to reduce risk. Like when you deploy something, you don't want everything to blow up. That's what we're trying to get to. So uh, the term deployment, when we're talking about deployment, that's the process of installing the new, whichever code base you have. It's the process of installing the new version of this code on production environment. So when we say a new version of the software is deployed, we mean it's running somewhere in your production infrastructure or environment. Uh, Deployment does not necessarily mean that the customers can uh, see the effects of this code. So that is the stress on deployments. If we are able to deploy in such a way that after deployment, customers that we can choose whether the customers can see or feel the effects of this new code or not, we are reducing risk because if the code doesn't work, we can go back, fix it, and take care of that. Deployment should have minimal impacts on the customer, and they should be driven by software teams. So when you that should be controlled by the software team. Again, this is very strongly worded opinions, but I think as the talk progresses, the reasons for these will, I'm hoping that the reasons for these will become clearer. Release. So you saw that, deployment in the previous was all changes. And you can see, it's kind of concentric circles. So the release are only the changes that are visible to the customer. So I'm trying to say that you can deploy a lot of your code and you can make only a certain part of it visible to the customer. So when we say a new feature is released, this means that production traffic is hitting the code for this new feature. So releasing is the process of pointing your production workflow to point to the code related to the new feature. So when production traffic hits the code, it takes on all the risks associated with releases. You can have outages, crashes, performance issues, bugs, and maybe even it could be completely wrong. So all of these risks are exposed to the customer the moment you release it. So the decision to release new features could involve various stakeholders, and these stakeholders not necessarily be software team members. They could be a project manager, they could be a C-level exec. So that is the difference that I'm trying to stress is who is involved in a deployment versus release. So depending on your team's practices, a release can be considered as a rollout of changes, which means you can do a roll back of a release if necessary. I want to quickly touch on blue-green deployment because this talk does not necessarily go into it, but I feel like this is a useful concept to discuss anyway, since it involves separating deployments from releases. Blue-green can be used either by itself or with feature flags. Green is the new version of the green, as in fresh, is the new version of the code. And is the current version of the code that's running on production. So releases usually in blue-green involve pointing the traffic from the current version to the new version, and this is usually achieved with the help of something like a load balancer, and that's the most common way to do it. There are other ways too, obviously, but I'm just talking about how it's generally done across the industry. So blue-green is infrastructure level changes. And the moment you point from blue to green, Screen takes on all the risks associated with being in a production environment. Now, if it's not working, it's easy to roll back. So that's one of the advantages of blue-green deployments. Since blue-green deployments involve production infrastructure, this is a very useful technique to use when infrastructure level change. So feature flags can still be used in conjunction or separately. So again, it's all, it depends on how you want to go about doing it and how you leverage techniques and patterns. Some key takeaways: deployment should be continuous. They should have low impact on customers. Releases should be a mindful business decision because they could have high impact to the customer, hopefully positive. So in the next section, I'll be talking about the various feature flag frameworks and services. And the first one is something called FeatureToggle. Now, this is the one that I used for the last couple of years. So I wanted to touch on this. It's an open source library. It was Apache-based open source licensing. So you can simply install it into your application, .NET application with NuGet packages. It supports multiple .NET platforms, although I don't know if it supports 3.1 yet. So that is one of the things that I want to discuss in a later slide is which one to select. It uses configuration files to configure things like whether the toggle is on or off, or whether, if you're connecting to a different toggling framework like SQL Server, the connection string for that isn't config. But overall, it gives you strongly typed toggles in your C# code. So that's very important. Like, you don't want to have magic strings in your code. So this alleviates that issue. The other thing is if there's something wrong with the toggling, like if the configuration file is incorrect or missing, it'll simply throw an exception. So the application will not continue to run in an unknown state. So always watch for exceptions when you're using these feature flags. Just something to keep in mind. The FeatureToggle library, it has a flexible provider model. There are some predefined ones, but there's also an interface that you can implement called iFeatureToggle that you can use to customize. It supports a number of external configurations, so you can configure in code itself, which means you'd need to redeploy it, but you can use app or web config or any of those configuration files. So you can use SQL Server or RavenDB. Now, these are the ones that are currently existing there. You can download the source code and you can implement your own. I'll jump into that in a few minutes. And the reason I keep looking away is I want to make sure I'm staying on track. The downside of this is it has no inbuilt telemetry. And the other downside of this is I have not seen any new contributions to the project in a couple of years. So it's a great one to get started with, but keep in mind that there's no new contributions to the project. The next one I want to talk about is feature management. This is kind of the new one, new as in relatively new in .NET Core. It's built on top of the .NET Core configuration system. It supports a local JSON file for configuration, and you can toggle on and off using the config file, but it's extremely flexible. So the other thing is it has API extensions for ASP.NET Core, MVC framework, so you can do routings, filters, action attributes, all of these. You can implement them with using feature management. Feature management flags have two parts. One is a name, and the other is a feature filter. And we'll look at code shortly to see what this looks like. Uh, Feature filters are basically scenarios for enabling and disabling flags. For instance, you could have a filter that says only 10% of the requests have the flag enabled. Azure app configuration. So, the first two we talked about, FeatureToggle or code-based frameworks. Azure app configuration is a platform as a service in Azure. It's used to centrally manage application settings. So instead of using apps uh, in your code base, you can actually store app settings in Azure App Configuration. But you can also use it to manage feature flags. And that is the part I'll be focusing on in this talk. You can create an end-to-end implementation of feature management in ASP.NET Core using Azure App Configuration, which we'll be doing today. And you can, the other thing is if you use it with feature management, it has code that you can write to automatically handle looking at the updates without redeploying your application. By default, the .NET Core SDK pulls the changes every 30 seconds or so, if I'm not mistaken. So the advantages of using Azure App Configuration, you can spin it up within minutes. It has flexible key representations and mappings for app configurations and flags. It has tagging with labels, which you can use to set environment type settings. Like if you want to do one for test, one for prod, and you can use this to do that. It has a dedicated UI for feature flag management in Azure portal. You can compare different versions of flag. So let's say you keep toggling your flag on or off, you can go back and see when it happened and who did it and other things like that. You can leverage Azure Managed Identity for securities. That's really important. And it also has encryption of sensitive data at rest and in transit. The other thing, obviously, it's Azure based. It's very infrastructure as code friendly. So you can use ARM templates or Terraform to spin up the service and manage it from Azure pipelines. And it has SDKs for writing for having code connect to it. And the last one I'll be talking about today is LaunchDarkly, which is a software as a service. So Azure App Configuration is a platform as a service, and LaunchDarkly is a software as a service. So there is a distinction in that you don't have to spin up instance of LaunchDarkly. You create an account and it's already there. So that's kind of the whole concept of software as a service. It's a feature flag and toggle management system. It's a mature framework. It's a service. It's been and used for multiple years now. They handle requests for flags per day, or so they claim. And they have various things like streamer architecture and CDNs that make it really fast and responsive. The thing I like about LaunchDarkly is that it clearly distinguishes the testing and prod environments. And you can even sync your flag, so you can turn on a flag and test. And when you have it ready, you can say, I would like to copy this flag over to prod, which is really useful. And the user interface for LaunchDarkly is very user-friendly because they've been doing it for multiple years now. So a non-technical user can jump in and handle various things in LaunchDarkly. So kind of So which one should I use is going to be a question, and my answer as a consultant will be it depends. So what you want to do is you want to look at whether if you have a greenfield solution or not. So if you have a greenfield .NET Core solution, you want to go with feature management and Azure app configuration. If you have an existing app, you can use launch directly if non-technical users are flipping toggles. You can use, if .NET Core is what your the system is in, you can use feature management or feature toggles. And .NET Framework, especially the older versions, you may want to use FeatureToggle because it has libraries for older versions, and feature management seems to be more forward-looking. Uh, for extreme customization, feature toggles actually offers it's really easy to customize. So you can, like, if let's say you wanted to use Cosmos DB as your backend store flag values, you can easily customize feature toggles to do that. The other one, you can probably customize feature management too. I have never tried it, so it's hard to recommend. One thing I will say is FeatureToggle has been really useful, but I'm not sure that it's being used or being developed anymore because I've not seen active contributions in a couple of years. So look at this matrix, look at what your needs are, and then make a decision based on that. I would not exclude it completely, but just be aware that it has no ongoing support or contributions to it. We'll talk about some feature flag use cases and a quick time check. So that's okay. I'm doing good on time. So what I'm going to do is we'll talk about each scenario. So the first one is toggles and kill switches. We'll do that with a demo, and so we'll A/B testing and Canary releases. The examples I'm showing are kind of trying to build from ground up, and assuming I have time to do that, because I also want to talk about the technical considerations. So maybe what we will do is, I'll do the first one, and as maybe if we run out of time, I'll try to look at some pre-existing code that I created, and we can walk through that. And I'll keep tabs sometimes so we can do that. So the first one is a feature toggle a kill switch. We talked about this in simplest terms. It's an on-off button. You can turn a feature on or off by redirect the code flow in production. Well-wrapped feature means you can easily turn it off if it's performing badly. This can kind of be the difference between someone yelling at you or a public relations disaster having minimal impact. And how easily you can turn it off determines that. When you can even combine it with percentage rollouts and other things, which I'll show in A/B testing. If you're doing this right, you basically take risk off the table. So having said that, I will jump into, I'll do a couple of things. I'll set up my development environment, and I will start writing some code. Okay, so what we're going to do is we will first start with for feature toggles, we are going to try to for feature toggles, we're going to try to use we're going to create a toggle on or off, but I'll also walk you through the feature toggle library in Visual Studio. So what I'm going to do is I will create an MVC project in Visual Studio, make sure I select C# because I'm not good at VB. And what I'll do is I'll call this FeatureToggle, and .NET Framework 4.7.2 is good with me. So I will create this. And I don't want HTTPS for now since we're just doing some demos. So I'll create an application. Now I'm using Visual Studio because I want to kind of use feature toggles to not only get you introduced to this concept, but also show how to handle older applications. So while this is spinning, what we'll do is while this is spinning, we'll start talking about some of the considerations. Oh, there it is. Let's continue with this. So here is my Visual Studio project, and you can see it's just a plain Visual Studio project, nothing special to it. And what I'm going to do is I will open up the home controller. So this is just quick coding. So I'm not trying to do anything fancy here. I'll increase the size of this font so we can look at it. And I will start doing a couple of things. What I'm going to do is, this is a very contrived example. So in the index page, I will have a section. So let's say that I have a section in here that contains some new feature. So I'm going to show this new feature. I'm going to turn it on and off with feature flags. So I'll show you how easy it is to do this with feature flags. So the first thing we'll do is we will put this, we're going to turn this on and off on demand. So I'll put this in I'll wrap a statement. And what I'll say is, okay, so if viewBag.flag is true, then show this, if not. So if I come into my index controller, if I do viewBag dot, let's say I do a flag and I set it to false. And when I run this, it should hypothetically, or if the code is working. Oh, of course. So some of the dangers of live coding. So ideally, if the code is working, this should not show up. So let's do this. And so this is how you kind of start off writing feature flags. You've probably been doing it for a bunch of years. So what I'm trying to show is how you can build on top of it. So when you start with writing C# code and using that to toggle flags on or off, so you cannot see the new feature. It should have shown up on the top. So uh, in the days of back in the early .NET days, we didn't have any such fancy concepts. So we simply used to change it in code, and so that required a recompile, redeploy, which was painful. So again, we get away from these. So when it's true, you can kind of see the new feature at the top. So there is the new feature right here. So, okay, so now you're gonna ask, okay, so what's so special about this? Actually, nothing, and that's what I'm trying to show. So what I'm gonna do is next, I will say, let's see, assume this is an AI feature. So in the web.config, I'm going to say show AI to true. And in my code, I'm going to come in and say, I'm going to instead of hard coding my uh, value, I'm pulling it from the config file. So again, people have done this, and this requires a obviously the first time you do it, it requires a redeploy. So let's see. When this finishes loading, you will see that it's showing the new feature. Now let's say, so the new feature is acting up in production and I want to turn it off. So I come in here and I set this to false. I shouldn't have run on debug mode. So let's do this. Let's run on non-debug mode. And when this finishes running, you will see that the new feature is no longer showing up at the top. So again, this starts to give you already start to see, like, let's do this. So let's go ahead and set this to true. And now when I come in and refresh this page, my new feature shows up at the top. So it's already giving you an easy way to kind of change your feature in production without having to do an entire redeploy. All you're doing is editing file, but I'm not satisfied with that. So what I want to do is I want to and the other problem with this is, let's look at my code. So in my code, I'm having to go in and I'm having to configure a magic string. So a magic string, again, obviously, if this ever goes through code review and someone ever, is even remotely familiar with magic strings, they're going to reject it. So it's a lot of trouble. And the other problem we have with magic string is, let's say you have a show AI button. Now, I could easily mistype this. I could put a 0 instead of an N. I could, or there could be, I could make a typo, and this typo would actually read from the web config into from a different variable that's kind of similarly named but equal to the typo. So all of those become really hard to debug. So what I want to do is I want to see if I can strongly type this. So instead, what I'll do is I want to strongly type this. So I will come in here and I will add NuGet packages. So my NuGet package is going to be called a FeatureToggle. So FeatureToggle by Jason Roberts is the NuGet package that we'll be using. Oh, by the way, if we have, if we run out of time and I'm not able to walk through each one, uh, in I will put this link up, and my GitHub has all the sample codes for all three scenarios, and it also has my presentation as slides. So everything is online, so you don't have to worry about taking notes or anything like that. So let's do this. Actually, uh, instead of doing this, I'm going to, I realize that my time is coming up, so I will jump in and I'm going to open up the pre-existing code. So excuse me while this loads up. I have a machine with 32 gig RAM, but obviously it decides to run slow when it's doing a demo. Feature toggle, let me see, I pulled up the wrong one. So what I'm going to do is I'll go through the existing code samples, so it makes for a faster experience, and we can kind of talk about details if you want after this start. So in this example, and if you look at the NuGet packages, I use the NuGet packages by FeatureToggle by Jason Roberts, and so FeatureToggle by Jason Roberts. It also installs this FeatureToggle by .common, which has a bunch of, it's built in .NET Standard for compatibility with various .NET frameworks. The way FeatureToggle works is, first of all, you have to define a class that inherits from a FeatureToggle. So the first one is I'm using a simple FeatureToggle. This is one that goes on and off, and I'm calling it AI simple FeatureToggle. The one thing that you have to do once you have a FeatureToggle is you have to specify a value for that. You have to specify a value for that using this web config. So in here, what I'm saying is AI simple.featureToggle, and I'm configuring it to toggle from the config file. And the value is true. And so it in feature toggle. And then in my code, and this was the part I was talking about, is the toggle point. So my toggle point simply checks if the feature is enabled. So that's the amount of code I'm writing for this. And if that is true, then that I'll simply pass that in here, and this should go, and it should either show or hide the feature. Type of toggle I'm going to do is something called enable on or after date feature toggle. So this is where it starts to become powerful. So let's say you have a feature that you want to, after uh, June 15th. So uh, you also have different options for this. So there's an enable before on or before date feature toggle, and there's an enable between dates feature toggle. So let's say you're running a Thanksgiving sale like we have in the US, you could use the enable between date feature toggle. So all of those are available with the feature toggle library. So in this case, I would inherit a class that uses AI date feature, and then in my web config, what I'm telling is AI.date feature, if it's on or after 11th July 2020, it will be enabled. So when I do my check, so then obviously I come in here and I instantiate it. And then when I do a check, it does the feature enabled check will be set to true. Now, if I come in here and set this to 15th, it'll be set to false. So that it's already starting to, you can already see how, I would set the date to 12th and or at 11:59 p.m. or something. And after 11:59, it'll simply kill the feature. So the other thing I was talking about is feature toggles have a really easily, in, you know, they can be easily extended. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm creating a custom feature toggle, which by inheriting it from the feature toggle. And when I create a custom feature toggle, I can simply implement whatever implementation I want to do in here. So let's say instead of pulling this value from here, I want to do like a highly specific business logic. I can write code in here that will do that specific business logic. Or, if I want to have a feature toggle that looks up a store like Cosmos DB, which is currently not supported this feature toggle library, I can implement all of that in here. So again, once you implement it, you go back to your code, you use that to inherit, and this is where the strongly typing part comes in. There is you can see that the part where I pull in from the config manager, that's a magic string, but the rest of the code has no magic strings. So this is feature toggle as the library. The next one I want to talk about is let's go back to my slides. I'm going to do an A/B testing demo with feature management and Azure app configuration. So what I'll do is I'll jump back to my screen. So this is Azure app configuration. So I can simply go to my Azure portal and I can look for app. So I'll say app config and it will pull up an app config. When I go to create this, obviously I have to specify a resource group, and then I can specify the name of the app configuration store, and that's all I need to create it. Now I'll go to a previously created, so we don't have to sit around and wait it spin. The couple of things you want to be familiar with the Azure app configuration window is access keys. So these access keys will actually give you things like credentials to connect. So in this case, I'll be using a connection string from here. The other thing is the app configuration part. You can select, you can add app configuration similar to the one you use in your application. The advantage of doing it from Azure App Config is you can actually connect it to Azure Key Vault, and that way no one else ever had, like let's say you have like an API key or something, and you don't want anyone else to see that API key. You add it to Azure App Configuration, Azure Key Vault, and then you configure it from here. But again, Azure app configuration is kind of beyond the scope of this talk, but we will talk about creating features. So what I'm going to do in here is I will add a beta flag. And as you can see, it can be turned on or off. So it instantly creates a beta flag and it's off. Now let's go to my code. And this is my code. So what I'll do is I'll make sure that we can see it in here. So this is my project for feature management. And I need to do a few things. So the first thing I do for feature management is obviously added that flag. The next thing was I use something called .NET secrets. So it looks something config, and I copy pasted the the connection string from my portal. I copy pasted the connection string from my portal in here, and it's already set. So I'll not do it right now. So that's the first thing I did. The next thing is if you look at my project, you will see that I added a couple of packages. I added the Microsoft Azure app configuration ASP.NET Core package, since this is ASP.NET MVC ASP.NET Core MVC project. And then I added a feature management.ASP.NET Core. So I need these two libraries to talk back and forth with the service. And in the previous one where I did the .NET user secrets, that's the one that actually creates the connection string that talks to this service. So in the program.cs, I read the configuration file. So obviously I need the configuration file. next thing I did was I actually overloaded the options and I set it to refresh often because I think by default it's 30 seconds, and so if you're doing a demo, it makes it easier if you're not doing it for 30 seconds. And enable feature flags, and then finally I connected it to the Azure App Configuration Service. Let's see. Obviously, you need some of these libraries on here. And in the startup, I added the feature management service. So what this is doing is it's then remember the part where I added the ASP.NET Core feature management library for ASP.NET Core. So that library can actually be used to show and hide actual controllers. So I'm doing a feature gate in here, and it's using my beta flag. And so it's when the application starts up, it will use the connection string to connect to Azure App Config, and then it uses, because I enabled feature enabled feature management. The feature management service is now running in the back in the middleware. So when it goes and hits up the ASP.NET Core, the controllers, it actually, if you add an attribute called feature gate, you can actually gate it with the beta flag. So let's do this. I will go to this project. So cd feature flags, cd source, and I'll do a .NET build in here. So I have about 10 minutes remaining, so I'll be fast. .NET run. And this one actually goes to localhost. And I think it's localhost 5000. So you will see that there's no, the beta controller is not showing up in my top library. So what I'm going to do is I'll go to my flag feature manager in Azure App Configuration, and I will turn this on. And when I turn this on, it takes a second, but so I'll go and refresh this in a second, and hopefully the demo gods are not against me. But in the meanwhile, what I'll do is I'll prep the next one. There it is. So you see the new beta controller that was previously hidden. It just showed up right here. So this one. So that is, and again, you can do all of this by writing code, but by using feature flags, you're kind of leveraging the power of the platform to show and hide features. So you can use this for A/B testing. The next is Canary releases. So speaking of Canary releases, I quickly want to talk about what Canary releases. So, Canary release is basically very similar to everything we've seen so far. But what we're doing is it's a story of a canary in a coal mine. So the canaries in the previous days, when they used to mine in various places, they used to take a canary in, and because you don't see like poisonous gases, but when a canary stopped singing, they knew that something was wrong and they got the heck out. So similar to this, what you do is you deploy a small section of code, we call it a canary, and you only expose it to a small section of users. And when something is wrong, you know, because you're using metrics, you know that there's something wrong. So at that point, you can do a rollback. So So there's various ways of doing this. Microsoft actually leverages this in a concept called ring releases, which I believe a couple of people before me have talked about. So as new releases are deployed to a small number of users, and then it's slowly expanded to a larger section. So uh, the migrate phase could last for weeks. And because you're phasing it out, if you have any issues, you can fix them in the smaller group. And then as it rolls out to the larger group, they have better versions. And it's also very easy to roll back. The one downside is you have to maintain multiple versions of this. So that's something to be mindful about. And for Canary releases, what I'm doing is I'm using a third-party tool called Launch.ly. So you go to Launch.ly, you sign up, and you immediately get access to feature flags. In this case, I created a test flag. It's a simple toggle on or off. So you can you can already see that I did not have to go in and create a service for Launch.ly. It's already there. I just sign in, and I can start turning my feature flags on and off. So couple of things I want to talk about is the concept of users. So in the Canary release scenario, I was talking about how you can pick and choose what users you want to release it to. So that's also called targeting. So you can target a certain section of groups of users. And Launch.ly, it's called segments. So I have two segments, Gmail users, and the second segment is called Yahoo users. Uh, so the way this works is because I have two sections of users, I can go back to my, let's see. I can go back to my flag and I can say that the users who belong to Gmail users, for them, the feature flag is set to true. For the users that belong to Yahoo users, it's set to false. Now, you don't have to be satisfied with true or false. Say that for a percentage of users, let's say 25% of them can see it, or even 10% can see it. So, for instance, in a real production environment, this would be this would be beta users, but I also want to release it to a bunch of live users, but I only want to do a small section. So if there's something wrong, I can turn the feature flag off and completely stop the targeting. So uh, this is a really powerful concept where you can control how your features that are already deployed are exposed to the end users. And the Launch.ly SDK makes it really easy. So uh, you have like two different scenarios in here. You have test and you have prod, and you can actually copy a feature flag or sync it between test and prod. So it's a really powerful interface as your app config is getting there. So to use Launch.ly, whether it's test or prod, you go in and get the SDK. And for code, I already have code in here. So what I'm doing is I have Launch.ly. Uh, so um, for Launch.ly, what I'm doing is in my startup, I'm actually adding a singleton. Now, this is solely for the purpose of this program, but you can do it a number of different ways. I added the Launch.ly SDK key to my secret, so I'm adding this singleton so I can read it from the configuration file within the program. I added the Launch.ly NuGet package to the program, and so I instantiate, create a singleton for the configuration, which is injected in here. And what I'm doing is using the key, I'm launching a Launch.ly client. Now the Launch.ly client actually has this method as default user. So let's do this. So the launch directly client actually instantiates a user based on whatever I feed into the URLs. It's using the request.query string to create a user, and those would be from the pre-configured users that you saw, the users in the segments and in the portal launch. So what it's doing is it's using this user and it's talking to the test flag and it's applying the user, and this will and the default is false. So if it doesn't match any of this, or if it's even an anonymous user, it'll return a false. But if it has a match and the flag is turned on for this user, it will return a true, and then it'll show something in my uh, so if I go to my view, I've hidden a simple tag in here, but a useful way to do this is you actually put features within here. And I realize I'm kind of almost at time, so I'll quickly run this and then we'll jump into the end. So, Alan, is that okay?
What, sorry? You got cut off a bit.
Can I use a few more minutes to?
Yeah, of course. I'm here. Just use a few more minutes. No problem.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'll do a .NET build in here for launch.ly. My launch.ly. And then I should be able to go over and kind of start playing around with my project. There it is. So now this. So launch.ly MVC, you can see the beta tag. And that's because you can see that the default user I supplied has the flag turned on. So let's go in here. So let's look at these users. So I'm targeting my users have the flag turned on by default. So what I'm going to do is I will go back and I will supply a Yahoo user. So I will say email equals a Yahoo user. So for this user, it's turned on. So again, you can see that as I start to go through my Yahoo users, what did I must have added some exception in here, but sorry. Okay, so I explicitly excluded the Yahoo users, so it's turned off. So you can see that I'm on to target users based on certain criteria. Now you can decide what you want this criteria to be. So I could have like a beta users that have access to beta features and regular users who do not have access to beta features. And even in the regular users, like I said, you can roll out the beta features slowly. So, and you can have multiple rings. So these don't have to be the only two. You can add multiple segments and you can bring them on slowly. So I'll finish with a list of technological considerations. So the first one is feature flags are technical debt. So please, maintain good development practices on feature flags. Remove the old ones. If a feature has been fully released, remove the feature flag. If it's a permanent flag, then you have to keep maintaining it. Do not daisy chain feature flags. So don't take 10 feature flags and add them in sequence. It gets really ugly. There's an old Microsoft story from I think 2013, where they did a TFS release and flipped on all the feature flags at once, and they brought down the service. So be very careful. I use the DevOps principles of small batches. Limit the number of feature flags you're enabling and disabling at the same time. The other thing is measure everything. Launch directly, Azure App Configuration, all of these. Directly is actually slightly better at the metrics part. Azure App Configuration is getting there, so you have metrics, which means you get numerical values. You have logs, which are recorded events. You use these two and leverage them to make sure that your feature is performing as expected. And also the number of users that are using the feature, and you want to see their new users are even using the feature at all. Sometimes they don't. So use metrics to do all of that. And I discussed a couple of frameworks and services. You can extend these, so you don't have to use these. If you have a different third party that you like, you can use that. But make sure you're not writing your own framework because feature flags are intended to solve business problems. Actually, help the release of business problems. They do not solve a business problem on their own. So focus on solving the business problem and then encapsulate the releases with feature flags. Do not write your own feature flag framework. I have, as my time as consultant, had to deal with CAD boards or the change advisory boards. These are really bureaucratic, and they actually require you to get approval from them for every single um, deployment or release. So this is what they are really confused between what a deployment is versus what a release is. So what I would say is, start writing small sections of your code, deploy them, but do not put them in the production path. And you can, when others do their deployments and releases, your code simply gets deployed. And in the final step, add a feature flag and turn it on and submit it to the CAB board. This technique has worked beautifully for me across various agencies, and hopefully it helps you at some point. And the final point I want to talk about is this is a quote from the book Accelerate by Nicole Forsgren and Jess Humble. It talks about the fact that you do not want to use long-lived branches. So, write small sections of code, merge them in, deploy them, and finally use a feature flag to release. Use your feature flag as a as the branch. Do not have a separate feature branch that goes on for 3 months. Use the small principles of deployment and keep deploying it, and then your feature flag becomes your execution branch. So in production, your execution branch is your feature flag. You simply turn it on or off. And what I will do is so these are the things that I we discussed, and hopefully I was able to cover those. Call to action, please use feature flags. If you would like to, please contact me with what framework you would use or which service you want to use. I would be really interested in knowing. This is my contact info. If you want to screenshot it, or you can simply search for me. I think my name is unique to where people have not squatted on it yet. And these are some of the resources. I will, in the Slack, I will add the actual code. I'll add the link to my slides and stuff. So with that, thank you very much. And I will and now stop. I'll stop this presentation, and then I will log into Slack and see how to. If there are any questions I need to answer.